All right. I think it's 3 minutes after the hour, so we'll get started. Hey, everybody. I'm Kalen. I'm a contributor on the project and work at PipeKit, which is a control plane for data teams that run Argo workflows. Today, we have quite a few things to cover. We'll get started with some contributor shout outs as we let more folks roll in. And then want to definitely call out all the Argo talks we had at recent conferences. That's why we haven't had a community meeting in a while. Is we had ArgoCon in September, KubeCon North America in October, and a lot of Argo news going on there. A couple other announcements, and then we have a couple of presentations today. So as mentioned a little earlier, Michael Crenshaw from Intuit will be presenting on an Argo CD plugin, which we're excited to hear about. And then we have a quick Hera workflows update from Flaviu at Dyno Therapeutics. So yeah, let's get into it. First, shout out to some new Argo Proj members, Isatha, Rohan, Tim, especially for their contributions on workflows recently. So shout out there. And then a special shout out to Julie at Intuit, who's now a reviewer on the project. Well done, everybody. And let me know if I missed you in the member shout out, and I will shout out to you at the next community meeting. Another shout out here, want to shout out to Xianchu for so many reviews over the last month or two and several PRs. Pretty awesome contributions here, especially on the UI side, which we all know needs love every so often. So thank you for that. And now for the conference roundup. So what I did is I put quite a lot of talks in the Google Doc here. So at ArgoCon, obviously we had a workflows track. You can now see all those talks on YouTube. You click this link, and there's a workflows and events roadmap updates from Bala and Derek. So you can check that out. And let me see if I pull up. Yeah, so here's the video for the roadmap updates and the playlist here on YouTube. You can go through if you're interested in catching any ArgoCon talks that you might have missed. And the full schedule is still live on the site here. So you can check that out. At KubeCon, there were a ton of, yeah, awesome. Thanks, Terry, for adding that in. So you can find links in the GitHub repo that Terry maintains. And then these are a few of the Argo workflows oriented talks that were at KubeCon. So Bala gave a talk about data science with Argo workflows and Metaflow, which I recommend checking out. JP at PipeKit and Will Wang at Bloomberg gave another data science oriented talk at AI Day. And then Intuit also did a deeper dive on their batch processing with Argo workflows and Argo events, which was really interesting at AI Day. And then you can check out how Adobe, Salesforce are using Argo workflows as well. So definitely check out all these talks, and then shout out to Henrik and Michael also on the call here for security talk, which is always top of mind these days. So thanks for that. If you have a talk idea for Argo, we're happy to, those folks that have given talks here, myself, we're happy to chat about preparing a proposal. The call for proposals for KubeCon EU is this Friday. So that's pretty soon, but there will be other co-located events at KubeCon EU. ArgoCon will be next summer, fall. So if you have any talks, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to provide feedback and get you going on that. Next item. So quick announcement here. We do have a new Argo workflows course. Essentially, Katacoda got sunsetted. So this new platform called Killer Coda is live. So myself and Tim Collins migrated much of the content to Killer Coda. We need to migrate a couple more modules, but so far it's a usable course here. So hop into here and you can share this with anyone who's new to Argo workflows if they'd like to get started. this spins up Kubernetes in the browser for them or in the cloud via the browser. And so they can learn Argo workflows without messing around locally or in AWS account. And we're now taking feedback on this to add a few more modules and fix any bugs you might be running into. So info on that is throughout the course. We have links for providing feedback. We'd love to hear it. And if you have any other input on what courses or modules we should add to here, please let us know. Things on our mind are, running like basic data pipelines, basic CI pipelines. We'd love to add these in here. And then once things are stable on Killer Coda, we'll look to migrate this over to the Argo Proj repo if possible. So that's some exciting news for the Argo newbies out there. One last quick announcement before we hop into presentations. We will be, Intuit just announced Numaflow, so you can check out the GitHub repo here, which is a new platform for running streaming on Kubernetes, which might be of interest to anyone doing batch processing on Kubernetes with Argo. So make sure to check out Numaflow, give it a star if you haven't already. Almost to 300 stars, so maybe we can change that on this call. Start it up here and we'll get it to 300. But wanted to promote that new project. So yeah, with that, I'll pause to see if there's any questions on these announcements, and then we can hand it over to Flav. Any questions? All right, cool. Flaviu, are you ready to share and present?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right.
I will stop sharing.
And I'll start sharing.
Thanks.
My video doesn't start for some reason, so I'll just leave it off for now. Okay, so hi everyone. Thanks, Kaylin, for the introduction. My name is Flaviu. I'm a senior software engineer at Dyno Therapeutics. And I'll keep this short. I just have a few short updates about Hera that I would like to talk to you about today. So for those who may not be familiar with Hera, it's an Argo Workflows Python SDK that was released last year, I think in October, in collaboration with the folks at Intuit. And the core feature that Hera tries to provide is simplicity in workflow construction and submission. And really all you have to do to start playing with Hera is, as long as you have an Argo Workflows server deployed, you can inject your hosting token for authentication purposes and start delivering value, hopefully, for your organization. Hera is a actual Greek goddess, which is why I'm using the statue on the slide. I gave a community presentation in June, if I recall correctly, and at that point we were on v350 sitting at 24 contributors and 127 stars. And since then we went through a major version release because we had to make some adaptations that I will talk to you about in a second. But now we're on 420. We have 36 contributors and 228 stars, and a new maintainer, Asgeir Berlin from Oda in Norway, who single-handedly, in my opinion, developed V4, which was a very an awesome contribution that I'm very grateful for. And he's been on the project for several months now, and he has many great ideas for the direction that Hera can take. So V4 brings Hera to almost a one-to-one mapping with Argo concepts. And what do I mean by that? I mean, so previously before Hera had a few keyword arguments and things like that on some Python classes that were not exactly available in Argo workflows. So we didn't use source, we used func. We didn't use with param, we used with func param or func params or something like that. And that was a bit challenging to map directly to Argo workflows. So we decided to be as close to Argo workflows as we possibly can in Hera. And it's not fully featured in the sense that it doesn't have all of the features that Argo workflows has, But V4 introduced a bunch of things such as templates, a very nice language for expressions, which are quite complicated to write in YAML, and they're much nicer to express in code and then have them rendered into YAML. Support for DAGs of DAGs. We started having a GitHub focus in Hera because there is community appetite to use Hera or Python generally for constructing workflow YAML files, and then have them integrate easily with Argo CD or whatever GitHub's infrastructure some organizations have. So we introduced some very small things that support YAML generation and dictionary generation in Hera. And we finally added an RTD page and a bunch of examples to Hera, and those are also linked in the RTD docs as well. If you go to the repo, you'll find a bunch of examples, but I wanted to briefly show the very classic diamond example that you find in a lot of Argo workflow examples. So here you have a task named ABCD. All of them run this say function, and it has that parameter which gets mapped to message specifically. That's how you set dependencies. And for those of you who may have quite a bit of experience with Airflow, this may look familiar in terms of the way you structure tasks and dependencies. And this was intentional in order to facilitate adoption of Hera and Argo workflows, or Argo workflows primarily via Hera, for anyone who would like to migrate from Airflow to something like Argo. And this is a demonstration of how you run a single DAG for every task. So this one specifically will run these two tasks in T1 in parallel, and then T2 will gather all of the results. And a lot of the examples are replicated from the core repository, but the core Argo workflows repository, but expressed in Hera. Some of the immediate things that we would like to do is move away from the OpenAPI generated Argo Workflows SDK. It's auto-generated code, and it's okay, but it's quite hard to read, and it's challenging to use because it has extremely long class names. The explanations on it are very hard to understand. It's quite challenging to know exactly what you need to set, what you cannot set. Type checks are challenging. Like, we don't even do type checks in Hera, for instance, because or using that SDK, I mean, because we think it exposes users to just a lot of complications, and we would rather not do it, unfortunately, but we would like to. So we're thinking about using Pydantic to generate models from the OpenAPI spec, and that's pretty exciting because using Pydantic, we can generate very clean interfaces using a very popular package in the Python community. And we can auto-generate the YAML specifications that people need for GitOps, for instance. And we can also have a direct association between the Hera version and the supported Argo version. For instance, right now, because we use that SDK, we don't have a version in Hera, a version of Argo workflows specified in Hera. So we currently don't say you can use Hera with Argo 3.3.4. We say you can use it with Argo, but there's no guarantee that it works with 2.9, for instance. And there are some organizations that did not prioritize updates, for example, and they may still be on 2.9.0 or whatever. As a follow-up, we'd like to build a Hera Argo API layer because the current services that Hera uses to submit workflows are actually auto-generated as well. So we hope that will actually make it easier for users to not only use Hera, but use the auto-generated code to submit their own workflow combinations or whatever, because they should be, those auto-generated objects from Pydantic should be much, much easier to use. And if there's some feature that Hera may not provide, users have the flexibility to do it via that auto-generated code. The ambition is to also build Hera CD and Hera events, which would be very exciting to sort of unify the Argo ecosystem under the Hera brand in Python specifically. We're still assembling proposals for that, and I will probably reach out to some folks in the audience when we're going to start on that specifically. And lastly, I had a conversation with Alex Collins in the past about the potential of making Hera the official Python SDK of Argo workflows. And we were talking at the time about perhaps surpassing some number of stars or something like that to see how the community reacts to this style of development and interaction with Argo. And I think we've set a threshold of like about 250 stars or something like that. And as we get closer to that, I would like to open up the conversation of maybe making, perhaps migrating Hera to Argo Proj rather than Argo Proj Labs to gain more community traction or and further enable access to Argo workflow specifically. That's all I had for you. I'm happy to answer any questions, chat about some of these future plans and the updates, of course. And I'm really annoyed that my video doesn't work.
It's all right. We'll get your face next time, I hope. Yeah, any questions from anyone on the call? I'll check the chat as well. Cool. I guess one question I was wondering, Flav, is if you had an example of the new, I guess, 2 YAML, 2 JSON functions. And,
yeah, I do.
Okay. It would be, I guess I wanted to clarify how that would be added to that example on that you showed on your screen there.
There's a GitHub's cool. Example right here. So in this case, this one creates a workflow that has a global parameter called MSG on it. We write this workflow to a YAML file. And when someone, the intent of this one is to support submissions via the Argo CLI, like so, Argo submit hello YAML-p message hello, because a lot of users would like to have a consistent YAML specification that can be parameterized however they want via the -p flag of Argo submit.
Very nice. And then Terry had a comment question. Are there a lot of demands to use Argo CD and events in Python?
That's a good question. And I think that's part of the proposal to ask the community to see whether there is appetite for something like that. And also some of the core maintainers to understand their impressions of that potential. So in short, I don't know, and I would probably reach out for collaborations to better answer that question.
But to add it to that, definitely that Argo event, people are really looking for like a Python wrappers.
Mm-hmm.
I think Flaviu, I will sync up with you offline. Basically, the Metaflow was integrating with the Argo event also. I think we can bring the same functionality in Hera also. Like a workflow to workflow dependency and basically downstream and upstream workflows, everything they're doing with the Argo event.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can bring that one also in the Hera side.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry guys, I wasn't late. I was running that another meeting that was a little bit higher.
All good. Good to see you all. Yeah, sounds good. Let's yeah, maybe discuss in like one of the contributor meetings that we have coming up in every other Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Michael, I see your comments here. Thanks. So Michael said, I've seen folks in Slack wanting a Python client for CD. There's a Swagger doc, so that should be helpful for creating the basic client. But most of our users are in GitHub, Lab, or GitLab pipelines or Jenkins. So they usually use the CLI. Yeah, do you want to expand on any of that, Michael?
Just that like workflows lends itself really well to Python because a lot of folks are doing ML ops and like use Python day to day. CD is a little different case. People like the CLI, but it doesn't hurt to have a Python client.
Yeah, because the CA is totally like a different ball game because it's running as a GitHub options, right? Otherwise, CD should have like a Python supportable instead of customized. Then whenever the Python code is changed, then the CD server will read that Python code and convert as a YAML file to deploy into Argo, like a Kubernetes.
Yeah, I've heard that feedback before as well, Bala, that it would be nice for Hera to have a CLI that can iterate through Python files, similar to how PyTest does it, and do a 2 YAML on everything. So then users can simply sync using CD after.
Yeah, so that is a good one. Like instead of the people are writing the YAML file on the GitHub, they can write a Python. Then CD will automatically read the Python and internally, magically, it will convert to YAML file and deploy into the Kubernetes. That's a really nice feature. It will be like a game changer on the Argo CD side and as well as the entire Argo side.
If anyone wanted help writing that Argo CD plugin, I'd be interested in, at least guiding that because I work a lot on the plugins.
Yeah. In this way, like even Argo event, Argo workflow, anything they can write in the Python that can be deployed into Kubernetes via Argo CD. Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, I was also thinking, folks, about a Hera SDK package. And you know how you can install optional dependencies in Python? You can say, hey, I want workflows and CD, but I don't want events. So that can be quite easy for users to install because they only want those two for their specific stack. So yeah, I'll reach out, Bala and Michael, about this proposal, and I'll connect with Alex as well on the last thing on the update list.
Great. Sounds good for our next steps. Any other questions for Flav? All right. Michael, we'll hand it over to you. And yeah, I guess a quick applause for you, Flav. Thanks for presenting today.
Cool. I've got about 15 minutes worth of stuff, and I've got a few slides, but I'll try to keep it interesting. The title probably overpromises. This is a presentation about basically a spare time pet project that I've done. So let me talk about kind of where I've come from in Argo. I used workflows back in like the 2.2 to 2.5-ish days for MLOps. So super young, and I got started contributing a little bit, just docs, fixes and stuff. And then at my next job, I used CD for deployments just as a user. But I spent a lot of time developing workflow templates to do CI tasks, like running tests on PRs or building images, and then pushing information to MS Teams or GitHubs. And now I'm full-time at Intuit just doing Argo CD. But when I was at KubeCon North America a few weeks ago, I heard over and over again kind of what I feel as well. Argo Workflows is a fantastic tool for CI, and it only needs a little bit of love to become a really strong CI contender. So this project is about doing that. So I want to talk about kind of the tools I used before to make CI work for workflows. The main problem that you face with CI is you have a bunch of itty-bitty tasks that really don't deserve a pod. And there are ways to avoid pods in Argo workflows. One of them that I was super happy about was expression tag templates, because I could pull information from like a GitHub webhook blob and get the pieces out of it that I need, perform transformations, and then do some work based on that. But that's really all they can do is transform data. You can't like connect to an external API using an expression tag template or use a Python client that already exists to access an API. So then we also have HTTP templates, but those really just do basic API calls. There's no additional logic in there. You can't have input validation, et cetera. That would all have to be in a separate step. Container set templates let you avoid spinning up pods if you have steps that are adjacent and you just want to move them into one container. But a lot of times you have like something, you want to make an API call at the beginning of a CI pipeline, maybe to set an initial status on a GitHub commit. And then at the end of it, you go from pending to green. And since those steps aren't side by side, you can't combine them into one container step. So other tools that people have used, not necessarily to avoid extra pods, but just to avoid code duplication, is there workflow templates that people have developed and made public that do basic CI tasks. There are a couple problems with those. One, if the workflow template doesn't fit your environment precisely, then you have to start modifying it. And then when you want to upgrade, when someone makes a change to that workflow template, you have to go and cut your changes into it as well, your customization. And finally, one way that you could sort of dry out CI tasks is people could create container images that just do basic tasks like update a GitHub status. But the user experience for that kind of sucks because you have to parameterize the heck out of that container. And it's all done through environment variables. So you have a massive list of environment variables, and it's just an ugly workflow. And it doesn't help you avoid spinning up extra pods. So this is the tool set I used at my previous job doing CI. A lot of useful stuff, but not quite 100% what I needed. So then Alex Collins started talking about Executor plugins, and I was super excited when he started talking about the design for this. It's out, it's in 3.3. I'm guessing most folks here know that it's a production feature already, but I don't think that it's gotten the love and attention that it deserves quite yet. I'd love to see a lot of plugins being developed and shared in the open source world, and I'm not sure that's happening at the rate that it really deserves. So real quick, plugins, Executor plugins, they run in an agent pod, one agent pod per workflow. So if you have a bunch of tasks, even if they happen at different ends of the workflow, they all happen on one pod, which is cost and time savings. They can do anything that a container can do, like all the things I talked about that I want a CI to do, data transformations, input validation, and calling APIs. And they can be externally maintained in versions. So I'll show you the two plugins that I've developed for this task, demo test that I've created. And you just install it with a config map. And if you want to upgrade, you upgrade the config map. And it just has a new, say, image tag and maybe some new environment variables or something. And finally, plugins have an awesome user experience because the plugin author defines the input structure. And they can define that contract once, and then they can support that contract over in versions. They can create new major versions if they want to change that contract. But as a plugin user, you can trust that when I set these inputs for a given version of this plugin, they will be handled correctly by the plugin. So here's the stuff I've made. Two plugins, one to do basic tasks which interact with Argo CD's API server. Right now it can sync or diff an application. And then I wrote a GitHub plugin, which all I can do right now is write comments on issues or PRs. They're written in Go, just because that's what I write most stuff in most of the day, but the code's pretty easy to read. Could have been written in anything. And I created a demo repository, and this is designed so that someone could clone it, lightly modify it, and then run this entire demo in their cluster. So let's see the demo. I realize that some folks may not be super familiar with Argo CD on the call. So here's what the interface looks like. And this is what is deployed from that demo repo that I just showed you. It is quite a bit of stuff, but it's deploying Argo CD itself. It's deploying some Argo event stuff, Argo workflows. The most interesting thing to see here for this demo is where it's pulling from. So this is my GitHub repository. It's pulling from head, which just means the most recent commit on the main branch, and just the root of that repo. The way Argo CD works is if I pushed a change to this repository, because I have auto sync enabled, it would automatically take those manifest changes and deploy them here. So let's look at the manifest real quick. One of the main features of Argo CD is that it accepts customized overlays. So I'm referencing all these other resources, and they're defined in these directories. And Argo CD picks up this customization setup and constructs all these resources into one set of manifests. So there are a bunch of transformations that Argo CD does. In other words, if I put up a PR against this repository, making a change somewhere in these manifests, it may not look precisely the way it does in the PR by the time Argo CD deploys it. So for example, if I go to customization.yaml here, if I change the namespace field here, the namespace in all of the resources represented here and in here are going to change. So in Argo CD, if I went back to the interface and I did a diff, I would see a bunch of resources being deleted and a bunch of other resources being created. I'd see all that in this diff view. But when I'm putting up a PR against Argo CD, I kind of just have to make the change and then go to Argo CD and see what the diff is. So I wanted to write an Argo workflow that will take this PR when I open it, and it will go to Argo CD and generate the hypothetical diff between what's currently deployed on my cluster and what would be deployed if I were to merge this PR. And I wanted to write that whole diff as a comment on my pull request. So as a reviewer, I can go look at that diff and say, okay, this is what's actually going to happen when I hit the sync or hit the merge and then the sync button. And I've seen people request this in the community. I don't personally really need it, but it seemed like a really basic, simple use case that we could demonstrate using workflow plugins. So I'm going to create this pull request. And unfortunately, I'm running all of this stuff on a GKE cluster, which is quite slow. So it's going to be about 3 minutes before we see the output here. But in the meantime, I can show you what the workflow looks like. Most of the stuff in this repository is super boilerplate, like it's a well-established pattern how you set up a GitHub webhook to point to Argo events to trigger an Argo workflow. The interesting piece for us is this workflow template. And it's really simple. It just has 2 steps. 1, get a diff, and 2, write that as a comment to GitHub. So as the inputs for this workflow, I've defined number, which is the issue number or PR number, and then the SHA of the last commit on that pull request. Based on those 2 inputs, which Argo events will kindly pull from the GitHub webhook body, I will actually run the diff, and I've defined the plugin input structure like this. So everything's nested under Argo CD, and I've left room to make it look like the Argo CD commands. So right now I have everything nested under app, but in future versions, it could also support cluster, repository, all of these other interactions that Argo CD allows via the CLI or the API. So I'm calling Argo CD app diff, and I'm telling it I want to do the diff on, I've just hard-coded my application name, which is Bootstrap. And the diff is against this revision. So it's going to ask Argo CD, if I were to deploy this revision, what would be the diff between that and the current state of Bootstrap? Second, I pull the output result from the get diff step, and I write it to this diff parameter, and I just continue to pass in the issue number. And then this second plugin, it's basically following the GitHub API layout. So GitHub issue, it's going to write a comment. It's weird that it's issue. GitHub tracks PR comments as issue comments. So the API calls it an issue, but it means PR. And I just write that diff into a body, which has the nice GitHub diff syntax. And I've just hard-coded a couple other things for the sake of the demo, but I could have also pulled that from the webhook body. So with all this set up, fingers crossed, and I don't have a comment yet. It's entirely possible something is broken, and if it is, I'll just show you an old one. Let's see, let me make sure there's nothing else. I wanted to show you real quick the other feature that the plugin provides, which is syncing. So if I wanted to sync an app, I'd use Argo CD app sync. I'd pass in apps. I'm accepting it as a YAML string because I want to make sure that people are able to interpolate like an input parameter if they want to, because JSON is YAML. I could just write JSON here instead. And then I'm passing options that are Argo CD sync options. And I also created the ability to set a timeout on any given operation. All right, all that shown. Oh, we finally got it. So here's the comment. The comment is as me because I'm authenticating as I'm just using a personal access token, but it could be defined as a GitHub app. And what it's showing me is that we're deleting a bunch of stuff. And then there are small other changes, just stuff that I haven't synced yet. And then we're going to also create a few resources down here at the bottom. So this is what will actually happen if I were to merge this. Argo CD would delete a bunch of resources from the old namespace, which was, let me find the metadata, managed fields, namespace. So it used to be deployed to Argo events, but now it's going to be deployed to Argo test. And you can make sense of that by looking at this diff where I changed the namespace from Argo events to Argo test. So as you can see, since Argo CD does all these transformations, as a reviewer, I might be nervous about merging this. But now that I can see the diff as reported by Argo CD, I can merge this with confidence that it'll actually reflect the changes that I want to make. So that's the demo. If people have questions about the demo, I can answer them. And then I can talk about a few challenges I face.
Yeah, this is an awesome plugin, Michael. I think most of the Argo CD people are looking this kind of plugin. They want to see that what is the diff before they're merging into the GitHub repo.
Yep, I think it's a pretty common use case. And I think using the API directly in the plugin like I do is nice. At Intuit, we have a massive Jenkins library that wraps the Argo CD CLI. Like, it's huge, and it's not, it doesn't reflect like the CLI's behavior perfectly. Something that was community maintained and maintained in parallel with the Argo CD API would make it super easy for people to use all those capabilities and not write a bunch of code on their own and maintain it on their own.
Yeah. I can see that it will be like a very good benefit for that Argo CD community.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. Any other questions about the demo?
You got some shout outs in the chat there. Yeah, really great presentation and demo. Terry asked, could you add a link to your plugin to the plugin directory in workflows? So we'll, I guess, follow up on that after this.
Yes, I can do that.
Cool.
Sweet. If no other questions, I can mention a couple of the challenges I faced. First one was there's a bug, and I don't know if my fix has been backported yet to 3.3 and 3.4, but basically validation assumes that your plugins wouldn't produce an exit code or a result parameter. So I just had to strip out that part of the validation because I wanted to write the diff result to the outputs.result. So that bug fix is in. I just think it needs to be cherry picked back at this point. There are a couple sort of surprising things about how you have to write a plugin. One of them is Argo workflows will ask every single installed plugin, hi, do you want to handle this template? And the plugin has to explicitly answer no. For example, Argo workflows will ask my Argo CD plugin, do you want to handle this GitHub plugin block? And I have to explicitly answer no, move on to the next plugin. So that tripped me up at first, but it was pretty easy to write the code to handle that. Second, you got to remember Argo Workflows does authenticate with your plugin, so you need to check that the bearer token is what is actually authorized. All that's like in the documentation for here's how to write an Executor plugin, but I just missed it at first because it's in a bullet point list and I was skimming. So other folks, if you're writing one of those, make sure to read the whole bullet point list. That's all I got.
Right on. Yeah, any other questions? Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Michael. This is great. Yeah, we'll get the repo, I guess, shared. We should also probably post it in Slack too. Yeah, get this out there. This is awesome. you mentioned cherry pick. That was one thing I forgot on the agenda. Bala, you were planning on releasing a 3.3 cherry pick, right? So I just wanted to announce that in case anyone's still on 3.3. We have an issue for
this
that.
Friday, I'm going to release like a 3.3.10 and 3.4.4.
Oh, cool.
So with all the bug fixes.
Awesome.
Do we have a 5 minutes? Just I will talk about what Argo team is doing.
Yeah, for sure, Bala. Take it.
Okay. So basically, we are start working on the multi-cluster support for Argo workflow. So basically, that is one of the highest voted issue on our GitHub. Almost like it's reaching 200 votes. So the people are mainly looking for how we can support Argo workflow on that multi-cluster mode. Basically, I was in the ArgoCon. I was thinking with the Karmada and open source guys, Karmada and OCM. Basically, those projects came out of a Kube Federation V2. Basically, how the Kubernetes community started a Kube Federation, which is a multi-cluster support. That's the same thing. It started with they took that project concept and they built open source. One is a OCM side and another one is OCM and Karmada. That is the 2 projects came out. Basically, the OCM is a pull model with a Spock and hop and Spock architecture, and Karmada is a kind of push model, which is very similar to Argo CD. It will push the manifest into the worker cluster. This one will be pull from the hub cluster. So we will start working with the OCM guys to come up with the POC. And currently in Intuit, we are working on the POC saying that there will be a multi-cluster mode. Controller will run on the hop cluster. All the users will create a workflow on here, which will be dynamically, it will place into Spock clusters based on how the placement rule you are putting, a CPU, memory, based on the resource availability. The workflow will be placed into that Spock clusters. And once the workflow is finished, it will bring it back the status to that hop cluster. So a little bit detailed architecture here is the users will create workflows on the hop cluster. Then there is a multi-cluster Argo controller, which is same controller, but the only thing you need to pass a command line argument saying that the controller is going to run as a multi-cluster mode. Then all the Spock cluster will have a Argo workflow controller. Then whenever any user is creating a workflow on the hop cluster, which will be automatically send it to the Spock cluster, then the Spock cluster controller will execute that workflow. Then the status will sync it back to that hop cluster. In this way, we are able to achieve 3 use cases, mainly load balancing. Then second one will be a Uber UI. So the UI which is installed on the hop cluster will be managing all the workflows in the hop cluster, but the workflows will be executed in the Spock cluster. So we are able to achieve these 2 use cases. One is a load balancing, and the second one is a Uber UI to manage a multi-cluster workflows. And probably the future, we are planning to able to support a step level, running on the different multi-clustered. But currently we are working on the POC for just running an entire workflow on that remote cluster. Probably the next community meeting, probably in December, we will demo that feature. I will create a proposal and a blog post for the POC. Then you can give a try on your environment and comment us. Any questions? And if you guys are looking for like a multi-cluster use case, please go ahead and update the issue so that we will take a look and see that whether the current approach will like solve that your use case. Then we can update in the document with different steps and a different configuration for your use cases also.
Any questions for Bala?
Bala, this is very exciting. I'm a bit confused about the Uber UI thing you mentioned. Would that be separate than the Argo UI for managing the multi-cluster setup?
It's the same Argo UI, but only thing. So if your UI is running here, which will display this all the workflows, right? The Uber UI is like it's a same Argo UI. If you are installing on the Argo UI on the hub cluster, then that UI will display like all the workflows on the hub cluster, but the workflows are executing in the remote cluster.
Oh, I see.
It's like it's a byproduct of this feature.
Mm-hmm.
And you can submit that all the workflows through that UI also in the hub cluster, which will be executed in the Spark cluster and return back.
So is Argo deployed in the hub cluster and the Spoke cluster? I mean the workflow controller specifically.
Yes.
I see, okay.
Is it possible to use this to achieve like a failover scenario? Basically, if I have a workflow launched in one cluster, if it fails, can I automatically get rescheduled into another one? Is that something possible with this framework?
Yeah, that's a good use case. Please update it. We will try to achieve that one also. Like we will come up with some proposal on that. But definitely, like a lot of people are looking for that failover also. Like if the one cluster is failed, or because of something resource not available or something, then we can schedule it in the different cluster.
Thank you. Actually, just joined like 7 minutes ago. Where can I put the update into? Oh, sorry. Where can I put my comments? You said I need to like write this down somewhere.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I will give that the issue number. I will put a issue number in the. You are in the Zoom chat. So please go ahead and update your use case also.
I just sent it over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, so you have a link in the chat. We'll add it to the community doc as well. Yeah, there's another question, Bala, is just when the documentation that you shared will be available publicly. We had someone ask.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to create a proposal document with this feature.
Okay.
For the community with this all the architecture diagram and proposal and how you can run the POC on your environment to try it out and all the things. I'm going to update it in the documentation. Currently, team is working on that, but I have like a off-bake demo. That's why I will do it in the next community meeting.
Sounds great.
Any questions?
All right. Yeah, if no other questions, that is a wrap on our community meeting. If you haven't already, please place your name in the Google document so we know you came. And we'll see you in December. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Happy holiday.
Happy holidays. Yeah. Happy end of the year.
Yeah.